This is the I'm Possible Project show, where we interview real people who have achieved incredible feats in the face of overwhelming odds, showing that impossible is just a state of mind and that anything is possible. I'm your host, Joshua Rivedal. Today, in episode 13, Who is Jay?, I talked to Susan Ashby. Let's jump right in.
Susan, along with her husband Hank, founded Jay's Hope Fund, and it's administered by the Stuart Marchman Act Foundation, and that is on the east coast of Florida. I actually got a chance to speak at one of their Jay's Hope symposiums in 2017, so that's how I got a chance to know them, and they're fantastic and lovely people. And both Hank and Susan have written opinion columns for major newspapers, hosted at mental health conferences, and are dedicated advocates. And when they wrote this, not me, but when they say dedicated, they mean it. Susan, I am so grateful to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, Josh.
It's my pleasure. I got a chance to know you a little bit, and you and Hank earlier this year in 2017, and so I thought it would be great to have you on. And I did okay with that bio. I was in the advanced reading group in middle school and in elementary school, so that was fine. But you're more than that. You're more than that bio. I know that you're more than that, but our listeners certainly don't, and there's more about you that I don't know, too. So if you would please, would you give us a little background on your life, where you've been, where you're going, the Susan Ashby experience?
Okay, for what it's worth. Born in the 50s in Houston, Texas, to a lovely little white bread family of 4. Eventually moved to Florida while still in school, and met my future husband, Hank, in high school. So we were high school sweethearts. We got married shortly after my high school graduation. Hank was already a college student at that point. And basically we put one another through school as young marrieds. And eventually we started our own little white bread family. We had 2 boys and a girl. Our son is now grown, happily married. He's a geologist and just a well-settled family up in the Virginia area near Washington, D.C. Our daughter is a social worker, happily married, mother of 2 little boys, and her social work involved many different avenues, but I think her more recent evolution was working with autistic families, and she's done some teaching at the community college. So we're very proud of our children. We then had a 3rd child, Jay, and you already know by the name of Jay's Hope, Josh, that you introduced, that is the person that we're very excited to talk to you about as well. So we had those 3 children, perfectly spaced little family with 3 years apart between each child. And you've already kind of told what we did professionally, so I don't want to bore your listeners with hearing that again.
Yes, please don't bore us, Susan. God, no, it's fine. I appreciate that background, and I know a little bit of that, and so I get to kind of pick and choose and ask a couple questions. But really cool, high school sweethearts. Didn't know that. White bread family, got one of those myself. And white bread having white bread. I mean, what could be more white bread than Virginia and being a geologist? Goodness gracious.
Really?
You know how to make them. But I'm curious, though. I'm curious because you're quite a storyteller, because you foreshadowed so nicely and you didn't give away the plot. So, and that could look like anything at this point, because this is really going to be organic, but the raising of the children, the white bread family, these children, you mentioned the first 2 in depth, but you didn't talk about Jay. And Jay obviously encompasses a good deal of your advocacy work in your lives. So tell us a little bit about Jay and what his story is and legacy.
Well, Jay was an absolute delight. As a child, we just loved him. He was the light of the whole family. Easy to rear child is the way I would label him. Just cheerful, pleasant to be with. As life went on and he got into grade school and he just really got attuned to sports, He was a real soccer player, a fantastic little basketball player, even though he was a little on the short side. Fantastic basketball player, ran track one year, did a little swimming, was a huge fisherman, just adored fishing. So those are some of his interests. He was doing very well in school, and as he got into the high school grades, he also got interested in art and sketching and music. He played guitar and got interested in the upright bass. And that was always kind of a funny thing in the small town we were living. If it was a day for band practice, here would come Mrs. Ashby with her sunroof open and the big bass sticking out of the top of the car. So it was quite a crazy vision. But that was Jay. Up until about his junior year, he was really a happy, well-adjusted model child. And well-loved, just enjoyed by everybody. Then we started to see some troubling behavior, and gradually, it's easy for parents to chalk things up to a young man just trying to find his spot in the world. But troubling behaviors turned into bad choices, turned into falling grades, turned into unexplained anger, and eventually we got the diagnosis, schizoaffective disorder. And for those listeners who might not have a clue what I'm talking about, and I certainly wouldn't have, it's a combination of bipolar and schizophrenia. So, it's a diagnosis that one would never want to hear. I would say we saw more of the schizophrenia symptoms than the bipolar. But anyway, that was suddenly what we were unexpectedly dealing with. So there you have it, and meanwhile the other family is kind of just swirling around with how do we handle this, because the behaviors can be embarrassing, feeling like you've been somehow bad parents, feeling how your, quote, model family, unquote, is no longer such a great model. Difficult to discuss these things with other local families, and that brought us to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It brought us to our church and any kind of supports that we could grab onto. So now we're in the middle of something that we never anticipated and have had no training on how to handle, Josh.
So the family, mental illness doesn't just affect the person living with it. It affects the entire family, and you all had to live with mental illness in a different sense than just Jay. Jay was living in his own world, living with mental illness, and then y'all were doing it in a different way, as caregivers, as lovers, as friends, as parents, as sister, brother. What did that look like? What did the manifestation of Jay's symptoms, how did that affect you, and how did the kids take it, and how did Hank take it, how did you take it?
Well, probably not as well as I wish we had. Like I would imagine most family members would say that, because we were untrained and not very knowledgeable about mental illness. Our children had, at the height of Jay's illness, our children were not living at home anymore. Our son was, already out on his own, and daughter was married. So we didn't have the others at home living with us, although they had contact with Jay. But once again, I would say pride and embarrassment and just flat-out worry about what's to come next for our son and how do we help him. We learned about HIPAA laws and what their intent was, but we also learned about what some of the unanticipated outcomes were for family members who saw that their loved one was not competent to make wise decisions about treatment or taking medication or these things, but there wasn't a lot of recourse for us to help him in that regard.
Does that recourse exist now? And if so, how? And if not, why?
Well, I think as Americans, we really take great pride in giving people the right to make their own decisions and choices. But much like Alzheimer's, many times people with mental illness cannot make choices for themselves. I do believe there has been some movement in the direction of allowing families to have a little more impact and insight into what their family members are going through, though I can't tell you the precise legislation on it, on that. But I do believe there's progress in that direction of more and more people coming to understand that when a person is in the height of mania or some kind of a psychotic state, that they are absolutely incapable of making wise choices.
As far as supporting persons living with mental illness and their families, what do you think maybe what are three things that need to happen?
Well, I would say the number one thing has been getting people to be aware that mental illness is that illness. It is not the person not being able to make sound judgments for themselves, and furthermore, that they don't have control over that. It's not a choice. It's not the path that person would have chosen when they were healthy. I would say that understanding it as an illness is critical. I have heard people say things, when you hear some of these things going on in the news recently, where, I've overheard someone say, well, surely on some level that person knew what they were doing was wrong when they were firing that gun. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe not. Maybe that person thinks that they're saving the world because they're ill enough to hear voices telling them so. So I think understanding it as an illness, albeit not a visible one, is something we need to come to terms with. Number two, I would say access to health information for people that are suffering currently from mental illness, allowing loving family members to be able to share in the care of their loved one and understand the prognosis, medication dosages, and that sort of thing would really help, because it not only is it better for the patient, but it's better for society. It means less people housed somewhere and more people living in a loving home, that those parents or caregivers are allowed to take part in their healing. I would also say that providing better services is key. At the time we lost our son, and I'll get into that in a minute, Florida was ranked 49th out of 50 states as far as the services available for folks with severe mental illness. And we're not talking about the, quote, worried well, unquote. I suffered some kind of slight in elementary school, that sort of thing. We're talking about serious mental illness that for many people is a lifelong challenge. So I think providing services at the time they're needed rather than putting someone on a waiting list would be key. And it certainly might have made a great difference in our lives with our son.
I think those are great points. I live with mental illness. I live with depression. I think you know that. I think I'm almost certain I mentioned that at the symposium earlier this year. And mine looks different than many others. Everyone's kind of looks different on different people. And I think all of those points that you bring up, one of the biggest takeaways is that each of them is a compassionate viewpoint and response, rather than, I think there's a frequent either there's a punitive nature, there's a I don't understand, or we don't understand as a society, so we're going to lock them up and throw away the key. And a lot of times when we're afraid of something, or if we don't know something, then we become fearful of it because it means we're not comfortable anymore. And we as human beings gravitate towards comfort. It's a natural thing to do. And I think it's so hugely important that we continue to see it as what it is. It's an illness, yet it doesn't define a person. It's not who they are. It's something that's part of them that they deal with, but they're still a son, a sister, brother, daughter, mother, all that. Artist, upright bass player, fisherman, So I think we need to see things holistically. I thought it was really interesting that you brought up the point about the person with the gun saving the world, because there's so many layers to that piece. First of all, the world hardly lives in black and white as much as certain sides of the political aisle or socio-religious aisle or whatever it is, whoever's painting things in that to divide us as people. Life isn't a Disney movie where everything's in black and white. There's gray areas. And so when somebody commits a crime due to a mental illness, no, they don't get a free pass. They still committed a crime. But it's easier to treat, it's more expensive to treat somebody for their mental illness and get them to, as much as they can, a state of lucidity, rather than to throw them in jail. How big are the percentages of people in jail and or on the streets who are living with an undiagnosed, untreated, or mistreated mental illness? So I appreciate, and I know this subject matter hits home for you, so regardless of the fact that it hits home, I appreciate your compassion and understanding, because I work with a lot of kids ages 10 to 20, older than that even. And a lot of times, parent, for whatever reason, is stuck in that they're going through a phase They don't want attention, fill in the blank, and there's hardly a compassionate viewpoint towards that. And there's a young lady that my wife and I have been, and it's more on her end, that we've been helping in another country. And her mom is so close-minded to help. And so it's like little by little by little. So it's like, okay, sleeping pills, because that's a physical thing. But when it's a mental thing, it's still so hard to grasp. And so parents out there, just consider the fact that you don't know what you don't know, and that there's people out there like me, like Susan, like National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're just here to hold your hand, to listen, to provide support, because what you're going through isn't easy. So back to you, to Jay.
Unfortunately, we had Jay was on a waiting list for what I would term wraparound care that was offered to the 100 most mentally ill people in the county where we were living in Florida. So he was on a waiting list. He had been in a state hospital. He had been in a private hospital. But because of the long wait and insufficient funding of those services, Jay just couldn't wait any longer, and he took his own life. He jumped off a high-rise building. Shortly after he was released, he did this because there just wasn't any proper place for him to go. Actually, he went to a halfway house, which was ill-equipped to deal with folks with mental illness. So, it's next to malpractice to release someone from a hospital or the mental ward of a jail without ensuring that there's some kind of proper follow-up care. And that was what happened in our case. And I think he had just come to the end of his rope, Understanding and not holding anger about it is a long-term challenge, I guess is the word I'm looking for family members, not holding anger. And we could have done that, very easily held on to that anger. But, when you go through a crisis, you can either sink down into the dark muck, or you can swim and you can get to the top and come up for air and light and try and improve things for the next family. And that's what our hope is through our advocacy, which I hope we're going to have a chance to talk about.
We will. First of all, it goes without saying, but it needs to be said, my heart goes out to you, no matter if this was last week or 50 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. As many of our listeners know, as you know, I've lost my father to suicide, different experience. Can't imagine losing a child to suicide. And you spoke about the anger. I lived in the realm of anger for a little while after losing my father, and then with all the different circumstances surrounding that with family members. And at one point I realized this is heavy. It's heavy walking around with a grudge and with anger all the time. And in your world, well, you living in anger and just sitting in the anger rather than maybe even letting anger propel you forward, in a sense, which also requires that mixed with other kinds of fuel, such as hope, healing, support, but just the anger with no propulsion, it's not going to get the system fixed.
No.
It's not going to honor Jay's legacy.
Right.
It's not going to do anything.
Right.
So.
Right. And, I must say, honoring his legacy is important to us, and that we didn't lose him in vain, and that we can turn around our bad misfortune in our family into understanding and a chance for healing for other families, and a chance to improve the lives of those family members who are really, really suffering, but may not be able to put it into words that way.
Two things. I want to tie into that, but I want to make a statement first, and it just crossed my mind as you were speaking Jay's name. A lot of times people don't want to say the name of the person who died by suicide, whether that's family members, community, friends. If I speak it, it'll trigger something. I don't want to be in touch with my mortality. I'm ashamed, whatever the reason is. I'm so glad you say Jay's name. And I had a guest on previously. Well, it might not be previously, depending on whether or not I air it in that order. But I've had another guest on whose father died by suicide, and she's very vocal about that. And I wanted her to state 3 things about him that she remembers that meant a great deal to her. And I don't actually. We could do that if you want to, but I've already heard some really fun stories and some really beautiful attributes about Jay without even having to ask you. So I really like that, not because I'm lazy, but because it paints a wonderful picture of who he was and how we, and I say we because we're on the same team, how we're honoring his legacy together. And it's easier to do that with a face and a name and with the loving things about him. And the question that I wanted to tie into your previous statement was, how are you doing that? making things better for families currently experiencing in some way, shape, or form what you experienced with Jay through the whole process of him living with mental illness and then tragically dying because of it. How are you supporting families? What are you doing? You wanted to talk about your advocacy work, and I want to hear about it, and I want our listeners to hear about it because I think it's important, and that's what the show is all about, taking those lemons and turning it into lemonade. You know, you turned a lemon into like 1,000 cups of lemonade, so you're like a little miracle worker, but I know you've had support too. We're still working on the walking on water thing, but can you tell us about how you're supporting people who've been affected in similar ways as you?
Well, I want to go back to what you just said about lemonade, because it's a favorite expression of ours. And so I was so delighted to hear that it's also a favorite expression of yours, because everybody gets lemons, right? It's what you do with them. It's what you do with them that counts, because everybody gets their share of lemons, and you don't get to pick what kind of lemon you're going to get. It's just going to happen. Our annual fundraiser, we set up a foundation. Let me start by saying that, at the loss of our son, with the local mental health entity in Daytona Beach, Florida, where we lived, and decided we were going to do an annual fundraiser for this foundation to raise funds to educate others and to help support others. So we started what we called the Jay's Hope Fund, and yes, we're not afraid to say his name, Jay's Hope Fund, and we did an annual fundraiser for the first few years. Actually, our fundraiser was a Thanksgiving floral sale. We partnered up with a local florist, and we offer fresh bouquets and deliver those, and then Hank and I were matching the funds raised. So this is how we kind of got started with the fundraiser at Thanksgiving time. And just as an offshoot, the fundraiser also sparked an interest for me in floral design. In getting those flowers and delivering them, it was such an incredible lift for us to deliver those bouquets, and then to see the joy on people's faces when they got the bouquets, that it just kind of led me down a different path away from graphic design into floral design. And I've been enjoying studying about and preparing for, and now having a small business of my own and doing that. So it kind of opened up a new avenue of interest. So that was the first leg. And then as we built more funds, we started a second leg of that foundation called Who is Jay? And why did we name it such an odd name, people might want to know? Well, because we want people to know that Jay is a real person and that there are lots of Jays in this world, and that Jay can be your classmate, and probably is. Jay could be someone that you work with. Jay could be someone that you're in love with. Jay could be your buddy on the soccer field. Jay was the kid next door, and we all have kids next door, and some of those children will grow up to develop mental illness. And I might say it typically hits in the late teens and, through the early 20s is kind of the age when some of these mental illnesses seem to strike people. So anyway, we started Who is Jay, and we've kind of promoted that with billboards and some TV spots, traveling billboards on buses, and we have a great website that we've built, which is whoisj.org. We've done now 2 annual seminars for teaching people about mental illness. Our most recent one, which we were just thrilled to have you present at, was the Mental Health Symposium, and we did this at the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach, and just we're delighted to have yourself and some other really informative, educated, well-spoken speakers. Very proud of that. So I hope if any listeners are interested in learning more about how they can help others, to go to the whoisj.org website. We've got lots of information on there to help you.
Susan, I'm so grateful, inspired, hopeful, appreciative of what you're doing, what you and Hank are doing, because channeling that grief and even anger and all the different emotions and channeling it to help others and to better the world, it's one of the most beautiful things a person can do for humanity. So your work goes beyond Daytona Beach, because those people whom you're affecting with Who is Jay and with the fundraiser and everything that you are partnering with the Stuart Marchman Act Foundation, those people are going to move away. some of them, and they're going to take their knowledge and their life well lived into other places. So one of my things is always when I challenge students in whatever school, conferences, why can't you be the spark that lights the fire to change the world? And you're being that spark, and it's really wonderful, so thank you. So I want to take things in a different direction for just a few moments because we talk about deep things on this show, and we want to get at the heart of some social justice issues, suicide, mental health, trauma, and so on and so forth and beyond. And we want to inspire, but we also want to show people that we're more than just these issues, that we're real people and we can have fun and we can smile in the face of these things. This is our quick fire round here. So I'm going to ask some questions. This is our Johnny Carson moment, taking it back to the 50s, maybe Steve Allen from your era. And yes, that's right. I know who Steve Allen is. I'm 33, everyone. Well read. No, I'm kidding.
Highly cultured.
Well, some would say that. Depends on when you get me in the day. But so Susan, what's your favorite word?
Zippity-doo-dah.
Zippity-doo-dah. You're pushing the limits of word. I know that's a hyphenated word, so it counts. But I have a question. Is that like a swear word for you? Are you you keep it clean? Yeah, I'm curious of what this means to you, or if you're just being a smartass.
Well, maybe that. No, I like it. It's a high energy, cheerful word, and I like that. And it's from Disney, so
Yes.
Come on. I mean, we lived in Florida for many, many years, so we are Disney people. That's my word.
You were neighbors with a giant mouse. Yeah.
Yes.
I like it.
We lived about an hour from Disney, and really, we don't live in Florida right now, but we kind of miss that. We miss Mickey.
Yeah. He's really missable. I spent a lot of time in Florida some years back, and Disney was a favorite hotspot, to say the least.
Yeah.
It's just, there's something really magical about it. What is your least favorite word?
Can't.
Love it.
You can't go.
Can't.
You can't do that.
Also, pushing the boundaries again. You're going with the contraction.
Can't.
I'm kidding. Can't. I would say that's on my list too, because other than me trying to be like a professional ice skater, I don't really believe in can'ts. It's kind of the impossible to impossible. Can and can't is just a state of mind. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, don't like it.
My sister from another mister. Okay, here we go. This is a good one. This is one of my favorites. So if somebody decided to make a movie of your life, let's make it on Netflix. We'll give you a Netflix special. So if somebody decided to make the Susan Ashby movie, who would play the title role?
Minnie Mouse? No. That's the answer.
That could be fun. The Disney version.
The Disney version. You didn't offer me that.
Well, consider it on the table now.
Goldie Hawn? I don't know. I can't.
I like that. Let's stick with Goldie Hawn.
Okay.
And maybe Kurt Russell will play Hank.
Yeah. Oh, he'd like that.
And I'll figure out some kind of cameo for me. I'm not sure who yet.
You can be Brad Pitt.
I'll play Brad Pitt. Somehow Brad Pitt is in the Hank and Susan Ashby movie. I don't know how he fits in, but we're going to figure it out later. That's hilarious. I like where this movie is going already. Josh Rivettle as Brad Pitt. Nobody's going to watch it.
Maybe Disney will take this on.
Maybe they will. All right. Maybe I'll be Dumbo. Be the Dumbo character. I've got the ears to prove it. So, moving right along, we're going to have to name this the quickish fire round. Susan, who or what is your spirit animal?
Maybe a Siamese cat?
Okay. That's incredibly weird, but I dig it. Explain. I'm kidding. It's not weird at all. That's totally cool.
Well, we've had 3 Siamese cats, and I really like Siamese cats. I like their personality. Right. They're a little unpredictable. They're a lot of fun, and they're very talkative. So I think it just fits.
That is all you. I love it. Susan the Siamese cat. All right. Winding down to the last question. Susan, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say to you as you enter or as you get kicked out?
Well, I would like to hear him say, well done. You had your challenges, well done.
I think we can bank on that. Amazing. Outstanding. That's the end of our quickfire round. Susan, what does the next 6 months to a year hold for you? What does the future hold, whether it's professionally, personally, foundation-wise? What's a few things that might be going down in your world in the next 6 months to a year?
Well, we hope to do a little traveling since Hank has recently retired. So we hope for that. I'm really enjoying doing some of the floral design work I'm doing, some of my favorite being weddings. The intimacy that I develop with families when I'm helping them plan for their weddings is just real special to me. And so I've really enjoyed that aspect. And I also enjoy just the artistry of it. It's art in the true sense of the word. It's just not painting with a brush, but it's still all about texture, form, depth, color. So I'm enjoying exploring and learning that. And more important than all of that is just building the foundation and our ability to reach more families with more information to make their lives better and to make the lives better of the poor, unfortunate folks who are dealing with these disorders that they do not deserve, did not ask for, and really don't understand. So that's our wish, our hope, and our prayer is that we can build that foundation to reach even more families.
I really like that 6 months a year. It sounds interesting. It sounds fun, productive, creative, helpful. If folks want to get in touch with you, or maybe through Jay's Hope or what have you, if they want to help with the foundation, donate, do something in kind, what might be the best way to do that, if possible?
Well, thank you for asking that. Our website is whoisj.org, and so that is, we feel like, a huge resource for folks. There are lots of links there where they can get information, and we actually have been told that it has saved several people's lives that we know of. So we're grateful for that, but want to see it go much further and reach out to more people. So I would say whoisj.org. SMA Foundation has a great website where they have hotlines and so forth. So if they type in Stuart Marchman Act Foundation, they should be able to come to that Stuart-Marchman-Act Foundation. It'll take them to some great resources as well.
Okay.
Then, if they need an individual email, Josh, they could, if they want to, approach us more personally and not go through an outside source, they could send to Hank's personal email, which is hankashby1@gmail.com.
Excellent. Didn't know there were other Hank Ashbys, but would you mind speaking your floral design website as well?
It's Twig and Bloom, BLOOM.net.
Susan, thank you so very much for chatting with me and for laying out your soul a bit. It was a real pleasure and a real honor and a real treat being able to chat today, so thank you.
Well, I'm honored you chose to include us, and Hank and I both thank you so much for all you're doing to bring a light to a lot of folks that are struggling out there and bringing them some rays of hope and some ways to help improve their lives. So we are very, very grateful and really enjoyed your presentation in Florida earlier this year.
Well, thank you. That means a lot.
You've been listening to the I'm Possible Project show with Joshua Rivedal and guest Susan Ashby. I love sharing stories and how to turn impossible into I'm possible. If you want more inspirational stories, our second and third books are in pre-order right now. Changing Minds, Breaking Stigma, Achieving the Impossible, as well as Lemonade Stand. Both contain powerful stories of overcoming tremendous odds. When life gives you lemons, squeeze, add sugar, and pick up a copy of The I'm Possible Project. www.IamPossibleProject.com/pre-order. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're more than a community. You're part of the I'm Possible family. Until next time, sending you lots of love.